So we'll have to do the full solving on the next problem, but when you have a multiple choice, and I've said it before and I'm going to say it again, give your answers a quick skim and see if you recognize any patterns or anything that can help you identify what your solution is supposed to look like, different things there. With this, you have to make sure that you can identify that you're going to have extraneous solutions. So let's go ahead and plug those in. Well, which one should we start with? Look at your answers. 2 of my options have 5, 3 of them have 20, 1 of them have 5, okay, or negative 5. 5 will be the best one to start because that's going to eliminate half of our options. Either 5 works and I know my answer is going to be A or D, or 5 doesn't work and I know my answer is going to be B or C. If I start with negative 5, worst case scenario, I've only eliminated 1 option. If I start with 20, worst case scenario, I've only eliminated 1 option. So start with 5. That's going to cut out half your options. Plug it in. See if it works. We won't even have to do the whole thing. What's 5 minus 12?
7.
Can I square root something and get a negative 7? No, so I know 5's not going to work. Do the same thing, okay? We've got 20 and negative 5, okay? Doesn't matter which one you do. Pick one, okay? I would do negative 5 because if it's right, then you know what it is. If it's wrong, you know what it is. What's negative 5 minus 12?
17.
Can I square root something and get a negative 17? Done. If you worked out the full thing, you'd get answers of 5 and 20. So you still have to plug those in to solve, but knowing ahead of time, I'm going to get extraneous solutions because that's what happens when I square roots. You can forego all of that and skip right to the end where you check your solutions. Now here, I don't have multiple choice. It's fill in the blank. It says, what's the sum of all the solutions above? So I need to find all the answers. So I'll have to work out the whole thing. We want to go ahead and we want to move 3 to the other side. So we have square root 6m minus 26 equals m minus 3. And then we can go ahead and square both sides. But remember that once we do this, we're opening up the possibility of extraneous solutions. So whatever answers we find, we still need to go back and double check them. 6m minus 26. When we expand this out, we get m squared minus 6m plus 9. And then we'll group everything to one side. Okay, so we get a quadratic. Now we need to factor it. Well, it multiplies to give me 35, but adds to give me negative 12.
Negative 7 and
Negative 5. What are my values of m? What is 7 and 5? M equals 7 and m equals 5. But we have to then take those and check to make sure that both of them still work. Otherwise, we have an extraneous solution. So we go back to our original equation, 3 plus root 6. Let's plug in one of our answers. And see if that works out. What is 6 times 7? 42. What's 42 minus 26? 16. What's the square root of 16? Does that equal 7?
Yeah.
Okay, so far, so good. All right, let's check out. 7 works. Let's replace the 7 with a 5. Okay, so what's 6 times 5? 30 minus 26 is what? 4. What's the square root of 4? 2. If I add 3, does that give me 5?
Yes.
Yes, so it works. So what's the sum of my solutions? What's the sum of my solutions? 12. Add them up. Boom. Okay. So now we're moving into our rational equations, okay? Equations and expressions that have variables in our denominators. Ladies, whatever you're talking about is not nearly as important as what I'm talking about. I can guarantee you. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. The reason I've emphasized this is because it leads up to rational equations and rational expressions and solving them. How do I get rid of fractions?
You multiply the denominator.
Well,
both sides.
Yeah, we want to multiply by our least common denominator. In this case, it's just the denominator. That's how we clear out our fraction. 4k minus 3, 4k minus 3. What happens on the right-hand side when I multiply by 4k minus 3?
It cancels.
Cancels. Clears it out, leaving me with 8k minus 6 equals 11. Now what? Hmm?
Move the 6 over.
Move the 6 over, so add 6, 8k equals 17, k equals 17 over 8. Easy peasy. Multiply by that least common denominator. When we're dealing with rational equations, it's usually going to be kind of each of the denominators. All right, that's what we end up with a lot of times is all or at least most of what we have as our denominators multiply on both sides so that we can cancel it out. So we'll do the same concept here. It's just going to be a little bit longer. We want to solve to figure out what t is. We want to make sure that we pick the positive answer because it says if t is our solution, then what is and t is greater than 0, what's the value? So I'm going to multiply by my least common denominator, which just happens to be everything. All of it. Every denominator. Because there's no factor that they have in common. So t plus 1, t plus 3, and 4. You don't have to write this full thing out, but I find it really helpful, so that's why I'm doing it. So that you get a full scope of exactly what's happening here. The blue is our original equation. The red is our least common denominator, which we will be multiplying everything by. Here, here, and there. What happens in this first equation, or this first fraction?
The t plus 1 cancels out. We're talking about
Leaving me with 3 times 4 times t plus 3. What happens in the second fraction?
the t plus 3 cancels out.
Leaving me with 2 times 4 times t plus 1. What happens in the last one?
4 cancels out.
Leaving me with t plus 1, t plus 3. Go ahead and take a minute, expand all that out, and group everything to one side so that you have a nice little quadratic that we can factor and solve. when you expand everything, group all your terms to one side, you should end up with t squared minus 25. Now where do I go from there to finish solving?
Square root of t to the other side.
Before I square root, I can move t squared to the other side. Actually, let's move 25 to the other side.
25.
Or you can factor. It's a difference of squares. So either way works. You can either factor it, 0 equals t minus 5 times t plus 5, or 25 equals t squared. Just remember, when you square root, how many answers do we get? 2. Positive and negative 5. So what's my answer?
Oh, you gotta plug it back in.
We don't have to plug it back in. It has to be positive 5. Why?
It has to be greater than 0.
Has to be greater than 0. So we ignore the negative one because the question specifically asks for the positive one. So our value of t is just going to be the positive 5. Now, I didn't include it on here, but I want to talk about it. With our radicals, we had to plug our answer back in because we got extraneous solutions. From time to time, we may get extraneous solutions on rational equations as well. All right? So the way that we check those is actually a little bit simpler. Okay? I have values that t is not allowed to be. Okay? What would happen if t just happened to be -1? And I go ahead and I plug that -1 back in. What's going to happen to my equation?
It's gonna be false or untrue.
Let's pretend it would have been true. Like I solved and I got -1 as an answer. What would happen? I plugged it back in.
Would it change the type, like the direction of the signal?
Not really. What'd you say?
Well, the 3,
Uh-huh.
if you plug in -1 plus 1 is going to equal 0, and you can't do that, so 3 over 0 is going to be undefined.
Can't have denominator of 0. So for this equation, t is not allowed to equal -1. It's an excluded value because it's what would cause my function to be undefined. What other number would also cause my function to be undefined? -3. So when you see rational equations, you'll want to take a quick look and see what is x not allowed to be? What is t not allowed to be? What is the variable not allowed to equal? Anything that would cause any of my denominators to be 0. And if, once you solve, if your answer is on that list, you know you can toss it out. It's not going to work. Okay? So extraneous solutions show up with radical equations and with rational equations. They're a byproduct of that quadratic that kind of happens when we're solving. Okay? Not everyone will have extraneous solutions. This one didn't. Both of my answers are fine. They'll work, which is why they add in this specification of t has to be greater than 0. All right, last one. I think this last one. Yeah. Now, I can't get rid of my fractions because I don't have an equation. You have to have an equation to get rid of the fractions. So we're stuck with having to just subtract them. Simplify. What do I have to have in order to subtract?
Just saying.
Why don't you actually say it instead of just mouth it to me? Common denominator. Well, in order to get a common denominator, first I have to factor this. Okay? So what's that factor out to? What? What is x squared plus 5x minus 24?
Oh,
3
Factor.
and 8, negative 3.
8 and negative 3. So I've got 8 and negative 3. So what's my least common denominator going to be?
X minus two.
Well, they have that in common, so that'll be part of it.
8.
And x plus 8. It's going to be this,
All of them.
that whole thing. X squared plus 5x minus 24 is my least common denominator. So knowing that, I can actually get rid of 2 of those answers. A and B. They don't have the right denominator. Wrong denominator, wrong denominator. Get rid of those. So then, again, quickly looking, what's the big difference between answer C and answer D?
Positive, negative, and then right.
It's the only difference. So it's the only thing I really need to look at. All right? So when we're solving that, that's where we need to focus, is our constant, when we combine our like terms. And those two answers are both reasonable based off of a common mistake that happens. We have to be really, really careful because we are subtracting. All right? So how do I get my second fraction to have the same denominator?
You're going to multiply what, like x plus 8 to the top, 7, and then x plus 3, or minus 3.
Now I'm going to do it to both top and bottom. This one's already got an x minus 3, so I don't need to do it again.
Oh, yeah.
So this is just missing the x plus 8. So we distribute, and I end up with 3 minus 7x minus 56. You have to remember to distribute that negative. If you don't distribute that negative, you know which answer you end up with? D. You need to distribute that negative. Questions, comments, concerns,
Conundrums.
queries, conundrums? Alright, so